Welcome back. You're watching The Fix with me, Karima Brown. I'm in conversation with my expert panel, unpacking some of the politics, the regulatory dynamics, and just the global power issues relating to accessing and distributing and making available life-saving COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Dasu, let me bring you in here. Jens was talking about the fact that we're still acquiring a lot of our vaccines from outside of the country. We need to be manufacturing them here. Now, we've had, a lot of proud politicians kind of pumping out their chest saying we're doing a lot of great work. A lot of the brains trusts around the vaccines rest in South African hands. We have people like Dr. Glenda Gray, we've got Dr. Helen Rees, we've got, a whole range of people that are very central to global development around the vaccine. What needs to change here for us to be able to access the vaccine that we're part of in terms of trials and that we are, part of in terms of research and R&D? Do we need government to develop political will to issue licenses? What needs to change?
Well, this is a very important question. It's worthwhile noting that South Africa had a robust vaccine manufacturing capacity many years ago. But the advent really of globalization meant that, production in particularly the East, the costs were so low that it was not sustainable and it was very easier to import. This is an effect you see across the economy of globalization. You are quite correct. We have more than enough scientific capacity. We've got a deep scientific and industrial base here to be able to develop that capacity again. But it takes a long time. This is not going to happen in this year, when demanding that, listen, you guys, of the companies, that you guys need to do some tech transfer. But it must be a dedicated approach by both the state and the private sector and others to acquire that technology transfer, to develop robust capacity within the country. Let me just give you a sense of what it would take, for example, now to get out a vaccine. A vaccine, first, as you know, has to be acquired because we just don't have it. Now, let's assume we can get through that. If we were to get one of the two-dose vaccines, like the AstraZeneca one, we would have to inoculate up to 300,000 people a day, every single day, until the end of the year, making sure we have sufficient qualified personnel to distribute it, we have sufficient and suitable sites, we have a willing and cooperative population, secure vaccine supply, and a whole range of things. So what we face right now is probably the largest logistical challenge, perhaps, of decades, including our 1994 transition. But again, this country has proved on many occasions that it can meet challenges when the chips are absolutely down, and they are down right now. And the way to do it is not to bring in social partners on the corporatized basis and ad hoc basis that we normally do, where there's one lead partner, always the government, have to move therefore at that pace. We have to think a little differently. I believe the president has sufficient civil authority as the president of the republic to pull these partners together in a co-equal arrangement, business, labor, civil society, all having to play a genuine, clear role in this whole thing, but very importantly to co-govern it. That may form the template then for all the important developments that must flow after this pandemic, once we get through it. Because as I think Fatima alluded to, pandemics reveal, and they have revealed our inadequacies quite starkly. And those lessons now we must take forward.
Okay, Fatima, if we are to get kind of a people's alliance that acts in the interest of the overall, well-being of the country and the globe, then surely a nationalistic approach to acquiring COVID-19 vaccines has to fall. I mean, government is getting slammed that, countries of scale in terms of comparing South Africa have acquired the vaccine. Is it as straightforward as that, or is that a bit of an unfair comparison? What needs to happen, or what combination, rather, of strategies should we be putting together for a multi-pronged approach to trying to get, accessible drugs at prices we can afford and rolling them out to the largest number of people that require it?
So thanks. I mean, I think there's a few background issues we just need to clear. The one is that the entire vaccine acquisition regulatory system in the world has been toppled. I think it's the first time we've had a situation where you must commit to procurement and you must put money on the table before you register the vaccine for clinical use in your country. And that's the situation we're facing. And that is going to undo many countries' regulatory systems and their robustness. And I really hope that SAPA, the regulator, will be the bulwark against, making sure that the proper assessment and examination of all data, because you can't get to the front of the queue for regulatory approval because you commit to give us 2 million or 3 million dosages. So that's the first point. The second point, as Jens and Islam have pointed out already, is that this is self-created scarcity. It didn't have to be this way at the end of 2020 or early 21. There are multiple countries in the global south that are facing severe shortages. This is self-man-made scarcity. We could have addressed the manufacturing capacity issues. We could have addressed the vaccine sharing, the know-how, but we didn't as a global community. And I really think the WHO and the UN have to now step in and broker some kind of equity, access and equitable allocation. The third thing is that rich countries, some of whom are our trade partners, have bought more than they actually need, and they should give it back. They should give it back to the WHO so that they can be equitable allocation. We certainly can't be making phone calls to rich countries' leaders begging them for some of those extra dosages. It's just, the whole point of decolonizing global health. This is exactly at the heart of it, right? That we're now at the mercy of some governments, and there's going to be a quid pro quo. And we're certainly seeing that with the way in which the Chinese and Russian vaccines are being rolled out in other parts of the world. So there's obviously a geopolitical crisis that we're having. I mean, the fourth thing is that the US left the WHO, and we hope the Biden administration will rejoin, that they'll lift the bans on exports of any excess supplies. And we saw that happen last week, where India initially said no exports on the serum dosages and then reversed that ban. And I think that was because of this idea that even the global south, you shouldn't have vaccine nationalism. The fourth thing is that we have to demand as civil society and as what you call the People's Alliance or through the People's Vaccine or Free the Vaccine, that all of these drug companies that are getting quick regulatory approvals or making commitments to us share the vaccine know-how. There are companies, they may not be enough, but there are companies in the global south that if they had full tech transfer, all of the technology transferred could actually be scaling up in manufacturing, and we could get more supplies to the rest of the global south sooner than if we wait for the existing supply networks. And if they refuse to share the vaccine know-how, then really it's an issue of governments in the south, including South Africa, then threatening state licensing. The public will be on your side. If you don't do it in a pandemic, you never will. And this means that richer countries have to stop blocking us with the TRIPS waiver request. It's a simple request for the duration of the pandemic for certain COVID-19 products. Please waive all your IP rights and technologies. You'll still be able to make a reasonable royalty. Nobody takes away your rights if you were given a legitimate patent in the first place. But it's a pandemic and people are dying and our front line is being decimated, not just in South Africa, but in the entire region. And something definitely has got to give. I mean, let me just give you an example. BioVax was pre-selected by COVAX to potentially manufacture a vaccine. We don't know what has happened with that arrangement. They definitely have capacity. Which vaccine? For which countries? What's the supplies? Why was aspirin asked to fill and finish instead of manufacture the full Johnson & Johnson product? And all of those supplies are going to be exported for Johnson & Johnson to decide which country will get it, to honor those bilateral pre-commitments that were made with richer countries. So there's something severely wrong with the way in which all these negotiations are taking place and the way in which the pharmaceutical system is basically operating. And that is why we're saying lift the NDAs, lift the non-disclosure agreements.
Absolutely. I can't agree with you more on that. I mean, I was perplexed when I heard the health minister talk about that. And then obviously a lot of people on social media said to me, Karima, these NDAs are critical because companies need to protect patent rights and so on. And we need to protect the research. And then, of course, the idea is that companies alone, private capital alone, is the one that, injects that initial investment. Jens, I mean, you advise me Médecins Sans Frontières, what is the global practice if we look at just who actually plows the money into R&D, and what do we do around patents? What is the struggle globally that needs to happen, and the kind of multilateral agreements that need to be governing, this question of patents that obviously stands in the way of poorer countries, accessing these important medicines?
Most of the development for, let's say, vaccines actually comes from public funding. The reality is, up until COVID-19, Pfizer had never manufactured or developed a vaccine.
Yeah.
It does so now because there is a massive profit to be made. Vaccines is historically an issue that a lot of research and development fund is provided for by government, because for an industry, there's very limited profit opportunity in a vaccine. Unlike, let's say, a drug that you take every day, a vaccine is a one shot. Hence, the industry has very limited interest in that. Now, where we see challenges with medications as well is that the medications that we need in the global south, whether that's for TB, whether that's for malaria or other diseases that you could term neglected, but they're only neglected because they happen in a certain part of the world, there is a similar lack of innovation as well. So what determines the innovation most of the time is essentially the prospects of profits.
Yes.
And we need, in order for that to change, we need to be able to, one, secure that when public funds go into developing a medication or a vaccine, that those recipes or patents, as they are made available for the same public as well. One, when the public pays for it, it must be made available. And secondly, in the cases, as Fatima says, where now it's a pandemic, but also in other cases where it's public health emergencies, we cannot let profit determine, let alone the prices, but first of all, which drugs actually get developed when. As I referred to Ebola earlier, I think the most stark example of that experience is Ebola was discovered in the 70s. There was a large outbreak in West Africa. As MSF, we were heavily involved from 2014 to 16 and subsequent outbreaks. When did we have an effective vaccine started to be developed to Ebola? Only once Ebola occurred in Texas, in the UK and Europe. Now, that's fundamentally wrong. Those same manufacturers had the patents for those vaccines, which they had helped develop much earlier, but had then kept and held on to those patents simply because there was no market for it. Now, only once that market developed, meaning that when Ebola occurred in wealthy nation, was the manufacturing sort of scaled up and initiated. And that is fundamentally wrong.
Absolutely. That is where we will have to leave it. And of course, the question around access, equitable distribution and rollout of this vaccine is a critical issue if we are to use this crisis of COVID-19 to deal with the inherent inequalities in the global system that often makes it incredibly difficult for poor people to access life-saving vaccines. I've just heard now that the Command Council is meeting with the premiers, also meeting with religious leaders to discuss the fact that we have broken through consistently over the last 3 days through that 20,000 a day infection, and we are expecting to hear from government in the next day or so, particularly from the President. eNCA will of course keep you up to date. You've had your fix for the week. Join you again next Sunday. Thank you so much for watching.